Hell's Angel fed a homeless woman. Weeks later, her lawyer knocked at his door. Rain hammered the cracked asphalt of downtown Phoenix like 1,000 tiny fists, turning gutters into rivers and alleys into shadows soaked in despair. Thunder growled in the distance, echoing the loneliness that clung to the shivering figure huddled beneath a torn awning. Her clothes were threadbare, her eyes hollow, once bright, now dimmed by years of hardship, loss, and betrayal. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Then, through the storm, came the deep, throaty rumble of a Harley-Davidson. The woman flinched. She'd learned to fear men on bikes, the leather, the patches, the inked-up arms that spoke of violence and chaos. But this rider didn't roar past. He slowed, then stopped. He stepped off his bike, tall, broad-shouldered, beard streaked with gray, eyes as hard as steel, but somehow tired. A Hell's Angel. His cut bore the insignia that struck fear into most, but instead of a threat, he reached into his saddlebag. Without a word, he handed her a wrapped sandwich, turkey, cheese, fresh lettuce, and a thermos of hot coffee. She stared, trembling, unsure if this was some cruel joke. "Eat," he said, voice rough but gentle. "Storm's gonna get worse." She whispered a thank you so quiet it vanished in the wind. He nodded once and walked back to his bike, disappearing into the night like a ghost. His name was Vince Rook Callahan, once feared across state lines, now just a man trying to outrun his past, one littered with regret, prison time, and a daughter he'd never gotten to raise. He didn't give the encounter another thought. It was just a sandwich, just a small act in a life full of mistakes. But kindness has a way of echoing. 3 weeks later, Rook was elbow-deep in engine grease in his garage, a modest shop he'd built from nothing after his release. The bell above the door chimed. Not a customer. 2 men in tailored suits stepped in, followed by a woman in a designer coat, the same woman from the alley. Rook froze. "Mr. Callahan," she said, voice calm but trembling with emotion. "My name is Evelyn Hart, and I owe you my life." She explained she hadn't always been homeless. Once she'd been a successful real estate developer until her husband's embezzlement scandal destroyed everything. He'd vanished with millions, leaving her bankrupt, branded guilty by association, and utterly alone. The night Rook gave her that sandwich, she'd been hours away from ending it all. "But you saw me," she said, tears welling. "Not the rumors, not the failure, just a hungry woman in the rain. That moment, it gave me hope." With that sliver of hope, she'd reached out to an old friend, a pro bono attorney who believed in her innocence. Within days, they uncovered evidence proving her husband had framed her. The case was reopened, her name was cleared, and just last week, a judge awarded full restitution, plus the return of her seized assets. Now, Evelyn wasn't just back on her feet, she was standing tall. And she hadn't forgotten the man who gave her the strength to keep going. "I came to repay you," she said, placing a folder on his workbench. Inside was paperwork for a fully funded nonprofit, Second Chance Garage, designed to train at-risk youth and formerly incarcerated men in auto mechanics. Rook would run it, rent-free, fully staffed, with a salary that would finally let him breathe. But Rook shook his head. "I didn't do it for this." "I know," she smiled softly. "That's why you deserve it." In that moment, something broke open inside him, a dam of shame he'd carried for decades. For the first time in years, he cried, not out of pain, but out of healing. What started as a simple act of compassion became a lifeline for 2 broken souls. Evelyn found her second chance. Rook found redemption, not through grand gestures, but through one sandwich offered without expectation. Their story spread. The garage became a sanctuary. Young men with records and rough pasts found purpose beneath its roof, guided by a man who once wore chaos on his back, but now wore purpose in his heart. And every Thanksgiving, Evelyn returned, not with lawyers or contracts, but with sandwiches. They'd sit on the garage steps, rain or shine, sharing silence that spoke louder than words. Because sometimes the world doesn't need heroes in capes. It needs ordinary people who do extraordinary things, like seeing someone invisible and choosing to see them. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, and maybe share a time when a small act of kindness changed your life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another story that reminds us humanity still exists. Because in a world that often feels cold, kindness is the fire that keeps us all alive. Thanks for watching.